Welcome back, everyone, and let's do chapter 18. Unit 4 is going to be set up a little bit differently than the other units in that a lot of this is just like memorization about different kinds of diseases. So it's going to be a quicker run throughs and not as much explanation, at least I'm hoping that that's going to be the case. It should be, has been. So let's go ahead and go through this. This chapter is going to be talking about diseases of the skin and the eyes. Why is this still down here? All right, so in this chapter, in all of the chapters, we're going to be doing basically all of these objectives for the specific organ systems that are involved. So I'm not necessarily going to go over this every single time, but in these chapters, what we're going to be doing is describing the physical and chemical barriers to infection in the organ system that we're looking at in that chapter, the causative agents of disease in those organ systems, the disease process of those diseases that we'll be discussing, development of diseases, describe how the diseases develop in those organ systems, and as well as treatments that may be or may not be available for diseases in those organ systems. So that's the idea there, in this case, skin and eyes. And I never click on the right thing. All right. So essentially the way that the skin is protecting itself, we talked about previously in another chapter about how the skin has essentially, it's a waterproof barrier. It's relatively impermeable unless you break that barrier. So for the epidermis itself, the outside of the skin, we have keratin involved. That is a protein that is waterproofing and seals the gaps in between the cells. We have also lipids that are in between the cells that are hydrophobic and block water additionally. The dermis, the next layer, we have the connective tissue that's involved between the cells, blood vessels and nerves and the lymphatic vessels. All of these can serve as barriers for entry into the body. And then the follicles where the hair is growing, we have the hair themselves, which are not going to be able to be infected by anything. They're not alive. And then we have sebaceous glands that produce oil, and sweat glands. We've talked about this in previous chapters. So that waterproofing protein that we were talking about, that was keratin, if you remember correctly. Okay, for normal biota of the skin itself should be relatively inhospitable for most microbes in general because it's very salty and dry. But some things are adapted to sort of live in moist areas around the skin, whether that's in the folds, things like armpits, areas where there are ducts and down inside of the ducts themselves. So that tends to be where we find the highest concentration of microbial growth on the skin itself. So when we're looking at the Human Microbiome Project, trying to figure out what types of bacteria might be where on the skin, we've found hundreds of different kinds of microbes over many different areas of the body in 5 major taxa within the microbiota. I'm not going to get into that necessarily right now. We did talk about, bacteria. We talked about the viruses. We talked about the fungi, and we talked about the protozoa. So, just be aware of those being like the big 4. Occasionally archaea could be involved in that as well. It's less common, but it is possible. So just be aware of like those bigger 4. Okay, those are the ones I want you to be aware of. So yeah, it seems as though your actual skin biota for any given person is going to be relatively stable over time once you've been populated with microbes. Those are the microbes you're going to stick with on your skin. That changes, like we had mentioned previously, in certain other areas of your body, like your genitalia and stuff like that. As we get older and get exposed to other people and stuff like that, the skin tends to be relatively stable as far as what kinds of bacteria are growing on it. The most common ones are going to be Staphylococcus epidermidis and epidermidis. I always add extra letters in there. I always will continue to probably. Staphylococcus epidermidis and Propionibacterium acnes, P. acnes. So those are very common and they can live in high salt conditions. And about, like we had said before, 4% of the population will carry Staph aureus, Staphylococcus aureus, that we talk about when we talk about staph infections. So here are some diseases that we're going to go through in this chapter that are caused by microorganisms. And I'm not going to list them here because we're going to go through them. So we know about acne. It's a follicle-associated infection. Sebum, dead cells get trapped in a follicle, and bacteria will grow in that environment. Comedo is the skin swelling over the pore, leading out of the hair follicle. Whitehead is one with a closed pore, and the blackhead is one that is open to the surface of the skin. We also have pustules or papules that are lesions that have erupted on the surface. We have cysts that are pustules that come to involve deep layers of the skin, and as well as cystic acne, which are widespread cysts over the skin. So cystic acne, consisting of those cysts, being a little bit, of course, since it's deep down in the skin, a little bit more difficult to treat, unfortunately. I would be kind of aware of the difference between like pustule and papules versus cysts versus, comedo, and the fact that, whitehead would be closed and blackhead would be open. I'd be aware of that. All right, a boil is essentially just an infection within the deeper levels of the skin. So we get that often due to exposure to new bacteria in hospitals when we're already having our low immune systems, and we might have cuts or open sores due to like bed sores and stuff like that. This is where we get into talking about things like MRSA that are going to be resistant to antibiotics and can spread easily within hospitals, because, Staphylococcus aureus is a pretty resistant bacteria as it is. It just resists like being killed pretty well. And now we're adding methicillin resistance to it, which means it's resistant to that antibiotic and other antibiotics that are lesser than it typically. So your choices for treatment get limited as you face that. So we have the infection tends to be a localized lesion that is raised, and we will see redness, we will see pus, we will feel hotness to that area, and there's often pain, tenderness associated with it. And then that will usually be due to breaks from the skin from injury, shaving, abrading, and then the bacteria growing out of control. Staphylococcus aureus, which we keep mentioning, is a gram-positive coccus, which means it's round, right? Round cells, spherical. Coccus are spherical. They form grape-like clusters, which is what staphylo means, grape-like clusters. They are non-motile. They can't move around on their own. They are very, like I said, very sturdy compared to the all the other non-endospore forming pathogens. When we talk about the endospore forming pathogens, of course, the endospores are going to be a little bit hardier, right? Now, what do we think of when we think of endospores? Bacillus and Clostridium, right? So, so we have those, and we'll have Staphylococcus. And when we get into Mycobacterium, like Mycobacterium tuberculosis, those are extremely hardy as well, but we're not there. So, yeah, so they can withstand high salt, variation in temperatures, including higher temperatures, as well as low pH, like acids. Okay. So that was the picture before. If you guys don't remember, this is that mannitol salts auger. If you guys don't remember why this is important with regards to Staphylococcus aureus, maybe go back and look in your little lab manuals and reread that and refresh your memory, because this is something that carries through not only from this chapter, but, continuing through into the laboratory stuff. Yeah, we'll have a pH change. If the pH gets lower and we have acid production as a byproduct of breaking down the stuff in the auger, we're able to grow and break it down, breaking down that mannitol, creating acid byproduct, it'll turn yellow. That yellow change is due to the phenol red. That's right. I'm sure you guys all remembered that. The phenol red is a pH indicator that is like a sort of orangey red. It's mostly reddish color. At a neutral pH, it turns yellow in the presence of acid and pink in the presence of alkaline. So you can tell sort of pH shifts that way when you put it into the media. The salts are present to prevent growth of organisms that can't withstand the presence of salts. Staphylococcus organisms in general do pretty well in the presence of salts, and Staphylococcus aureus can break down the mannitol to produce an acid byproduct, therefore giving us that yellow color of the medium instead of the original red from that phenol. Man, I'm good. Okay, so the blood auger. If we're growing Staph aureus, we would see clearing around the growth, and we see essentially, remember, hemolysis. And you can see a zone of hemolysis where we have the inner zone where we have more clearing, and the outer zone where you see kind of a spread out clearing, but it's just less. So that's a characteristic of Staphylococcus aureus growing on the blood auger and being able to break down those red cells in it. Okay. As a result of it being able to do that, we can do this test where we take plasma from somebody, a patient, let's say, or just plasma in general. Let's say it's plasma in general. We can inoculate it with Staphylococcus, or maybe we don't know if it had Staphylococcus or not, and we can just look at the plasma itself. If it is negative, it will stay liquid. If it is positive, it will coagulate and turn like solid, either semi-solid or completely solid. Solid if positive. That's the coagulase test for staph. Impetigo is a superficial bacterial infection, causes the skin to peel or flake off, caused by S. aureus, Staphylococcus aureus, or Streptococcus pyogenes, or sometimes both. Children usually are affected the most, regardless of which one is causing the infection, whether it's Staph aureus or Strep pyogenes, they're going to cause similar symptoms. So Staph aureus has these toxins A and B that are exfoliative, cause shedding of the skin cells. And then we have coagulase as well, which we had talked about with that hemolysis, right? Now remember, Streptococcus pyogenes, we had talked about in another chapter, how it is beta hemolytic and causes clearing around in the blood auger, right? So it has hemolysis factors. It also has these adhesive elements that allow it to stick to the cells a little bit better. Those are virulence factors, yes. And then it produces something called hyaluronidase, and hyaluronidase is an enzyme. So if it ends in ACE, that means it's an enzyme. And well, I apologize. If it I keep saying starts, if it ends in ACE, that means it is an enzyme. And enzymes are like proteins that break things down to smaller parts. So what do you think hyaluronidase does? It's an enzyme that breaks down hyaluronic acid. And hyaluronic acid is extremely important in our extracellular matrix and keeping our cells together and keeping our cells stuck to one another and staying in whatever organ they might be making up, given whatever system you're in. So that's how it allows itself to sneak into things. So this is just a picture depicting impetigo infection. So if we're trying to identify Streptococcus pyogenes, we can do this test. We can look at like testing for bacitracin test for the group B Streptococcus. For group A, we have rapid tests available that we can check for, and we can also look for beta hemolysis, which is, you can't see that at all, but that clearing around the growth. So for the group A Streptococcus, we'll see that. So that's, how we might identify that. So which of the following enzymes is specifically associated with Staphylococcus aureus? With Staphylococcus aureus, that was the one where we were looking at that coagulase. Remember, we mix it with the plasma, and if there is Staphylococcus aureus there and it produces coagulase, then it is going to cause the plasma sample to coagulate or solidify, right? That's really loud. Moving on to cellulitis. Cellulitis is caused by fast spreading infection within the dermis. We're talking about lower layers and the subcutaneous tissues below the epidermis and the dermis. We'll see pain, tenderness, swelling, redness, and warmth in larger areas associated with these infections. And we'll also see streaking away from the sides, which means the infection is moving away from that area to other areas, which is a bad thing. This usually follows introduction of bacteria or fungi into the dermis through a trauma, or occasionally we'll have no break in the skin, and that's usually due to, like it's saying below, cardiac insufficiency. So you're not getting enough blood to an area to protect those tissues. Yeah, so we see this with patients who have diabetes a lot, and that might be part of what could lead to the loss of a limb in a situation like that. Next, we have staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome. This is a dermolytic affecting the dermis and causing the body to shed your dermis, essentially breaking down your skin. So this is caused by S. aureus. We have development predominantly in newborns and babies as a systemic form of impetigo, causing kind of a disconnection of your skin from where it's supposed to be sticking onto. And usually this is going to be caused by not every single kind of Staph aureus out there, but the ones that have been infected with specific kinds of bacteriophages come in and infect the bacteria, the Staphylococcus aureus, and they transfer genes from within the virus into that bacterium. And those genes code for things that enable this situation to happen. They are virulence factors that have been transmitted via phage into that bacterium. So it causes bullous lesions, so large areas that are going to be filled with, sometimes filled with fluid or just detached in general, sort of, they're saying like a wrinkled tissue paper appearance. It can be a very painful situation. And then when the skin is shedding off, it's like any blister, right? So when if you open it up, you're going to be susceptible to other infections on top of whatever you already were suffering from. So anyways. Moving on to necrotizing fasciitis, it is exactly what it sounds like, dying of your skin. Yeah, so it's a flesh-eating disease. It's, if you've ever heard of flesh-eating diseases or seen any movies about flesh-eating diseases like Cabin Fever or something, if you're into Eli Roth horror films, it's not one of my favorites. It's going to be caused by group A streptococcus. So remember, those are the ones that will be the hemolytic ones, the beta hemolytic ones that cause the clearing around it, right? So that's Streptococcus pyogenes. That also is the bacterium that can cause strep throat. So you're going to see this bacteria a lot. It's around a lot. It's on people normally sometimes, and it causes a lot of different versions of disease in different organ systems, including necrotizing fasciitis. We can also have other bacteria causing this as well, but this is the more common one, the strep pyogenes version. What predisposes you to this is having surgery, having deep cuts. It opens you up to getting growth in an area where you normally wouldn't have growth of anything. Then it will lead to tissue degradation due to exotoxins that are being produced by that bacterium, which we had talked about, like hyaluronidase, breaking down how the cells are sticking together. This is where we see a huge, terrible impact from something like that. This can lead to a toxic shock as well as septicemia and growing all over the body, and your body essentially shutting down, and can lead to death from that. How would we treat something like this? Debridement, which is removing of the deceased tissues, as well as amputation to stop the spread of the growth of the bacteria, since it is growing deep within the fascia. We want to remove it completely so it can't grow in areas where we can't treat it from the surface, right? So yeah, so we will also treat with hyperbaric oxygen because this growth can be slowed and can be kept from being made worse with exposure to oxygen itself, as well as our body being exposed to oxygen to help us heal and do its thing that it needs to do to attack the organism, right? Moving on to gas gangrene. Gas gangrene is also known as clostridial myonecrosis. Why do you think it's called clostridial myonecrosis? Myonecrosis is death of muscle tissue, right? So myo is muscle, necrosis is death, dying. Clostridial because it's caused by a Clostridium organism. What is important about Clostridium organisms? Endospores, right? What else has endospores? Bacillus species, right? I'm going to keep doing this. So Clostridium perfringens is the one that causes gas gangrene in this case. We can find it in a lot of different places, like the soil, skin, intestine, and vagina. It requires anaerobic conditions to do the production of the toxins that lead to this effect. Exposed to air, exposed to oxygen, which is a way that we could treat it, which we'll mention in the next slide. That could slow the growth or even kill the organism itself. Right, so this is an anaerobic, which means no air exposure, cellulitis, right? So inflammation, infection of the skin and everything associated with it. So in that case, we'll have a localized infection. And when we have true myonecrosis, which is like actually incorporating the muscle deeper down and not just the skin layers themselves, we start doing that, it can spread into healthy tissues that weren't actually infected. It's no longer going to be localized. So it just depends on what level we are at in this infection process. If you would call it anaerobic cellulitis being localized and true myonecrosis being able to spread to healthy tissues in the muscle. So I would know the difference between those. Okay, so the exotoxins that are produced by this bacterium. Exotoxins, remember, any toxin, that a toxin is going to be something that's like poisonous to us, cause severe harm to our cells and damage to our cells. So exo, it's secreting it outside of the cells, right? So C. perfringens produces alpha toxin, which ruptures red blood cells, causes edema, causes tissue damage. It also produces collagenase, which breaks down collagen, which is, part of your extracellular matrix and how your cells are supposed to, just like the hyaluronic acid, which is another thing that it breaks down with its hyaluronidase, just like what we saw with strep pyogenes, right? So they all do that. It also makes DNA just to break down DNA in general, because why not be nastier? So how do we treat this? We mentioned oxygen previously. It's sort of similar to the necrotizing fasciitis, debridement, amputation, hyperbaric oxygen. And we can also treat with antibiotics as long as we're not resistant to them. The choices here, the favorite choices here will be clindamycin and metronidazole. Metronidazole is a favorite antibiotic for anaerobic bacteria. So these are just some pictures depicting situations involved with gas gangrene. The person that we see up here with all of these collections of fluid and liquid and everything like that is because inside of their muscle tissue, they're actually forming these pockets of gas because the bacterium themselves are producing gas, and it's filling up the muscle tissue with these pockets of gas as it's killing the cells around it. And that's causing swelling in the area, and the skin can't always contain that. That causes damage to the skin itself as well as the infection itself. So, and then we see the hyperbaric chamber. So here's a question. Why are deep puncture wounds more apt to lead to gas gangrene than superficial ones? This is where we were talking about them being anaerobic, because this bacteria, when it is anaerobic and not exposed to any air, it will produce the toxins that cause this disease, the symptoms associated with this disease. Anyways, so if you have deep puncture wounds, they are more likely to be anaerobic than shallow ones, right? So that's more likely to cause gas gangrene when exposed to that bacterium, Clostridium perfringens. Okay, moving on to the vesicular and pustular rash diseases. There's a lot of them. These are the ones we're going to be talking about right now. Two diseases that present as generalized rashes all over the body, where we will see individual lesions that contain fluid. We're going to get into first the pox diseases, and that includes the following: chicken pox, smallpox, as well as hand, foot, and mouth disease. If your child has ever had hand, foot, and mouth disease and getting that, at daycare and stuff like that, it's not uncommon. First is chicken pox. This is caused by varicella zoster. That's the virus that causes chickenpox. It's highly contagious. It can be spread through contact as well as aerosol. So we consider that direct contact still, right? So so it can be spread through direct contact and actual literal touch, as well as aerosols, which are fine mist sprays, like if you sneezed and stuff like that. What do I want to say about this? We'll move on to the next thing. You guys know what chickenpox is. So we have the prodromal symptoms, which are the things that show up first in the prodromal phase. Remember, incubation period lasts about 10 to 21 days. Then we start having the fever, the headache, the vomiting. We have anorexia, which is usually happening before the rash starts to appear. That means that you don't want to eat anything. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing it on purpose. Okay. It just means you don't want to eat. And then itching. Obviously, I don't know if you guys had the chicken pox, but it's very itchy. I had the chicken pox, and a lot of the scars that I have on my body are caused from me itching it. And just to be clear, the scars, if you get scars from the chicken pox, it's because not from the itching, but infections that are caused after you've itched it and you're a kid and you got it nasty and you got little infections that healed up just fine, but they leave scars afterwards. So and you can be contagious from 1 to 2 days before your rash even appears. And then we just have a mention below of an anti-vaxxer that claimed to have given lollipops that were treated with chicken pox to give that to the trick-or-treaters. I guess, I don't know why. I didn't read the article. I don't know if she was trying to spread it to give immunity that way, which is the same thing as vaccinating, or if she was trying to prove, I don't know what she was doing. It's gross, whatever it is. So the rash that's associated with chickenpox will appear 2 to 4 days after the other prodromal symptoms that we see. They are blister-like. They are very itchy. You'll have about 250 to 500 on your body at one time, and it will last about 2 to 4 days of getting them. And then it takes a while for them to heal up, of course. So you'll see them first on the face, the trunk, and sometimes the scalp, which can be where you can get the first one. So even if you start expose your child to something like this, and they start getting an itchy scalp, and you're like, oh, why aren't they getting the chickenpox? That could be where their lesions are popping up the first, and you just didn't think to look. So FYI. After 1 to 2 days after the appearance of the rash, they'll become cloudy, and then they will scab over. And like I said previously, they're not necessarily going to scar unless you scratch them, infect them, get a little infection. Body can fight that off just fine, but it does leave a scar afterwards. I have quite a few of them. Treatment, how do you treat these? You don't want to give aspirin because that can lead to Ray's syndrome and affect the liver and the brain as well with that. That can be a very dangerous disease to get. When your body is reacting to this particular infection and you give someone aspirin, they will respond by developing Ray's syndrome, which can be deadly. This is not the only thing that can cause that sort of situation. There are other diseases that you don't want to give aspirin for as well. So just be very careful, talk to your doctor before you start self-medicating with things, just double check. So you mostly are going to treat your symptoms with this. So a lot of calamine lotion, oatmeal baths, stuff like that. Ibuprofen, they typically don't advise that because that can lower your body immune system enough that can lead to secondary infections and cause more problems. Acetaminophen is preferred, which is Tylenol, paracetamol as well. If you are not from America originally, that's what they call it everywhere else. Antivirals can also be given if a particular individual is not clearing the infection well. They typically will use acyclovir. Remember, we had mentioned previously about acyclovir being the preferred treatment for herpes viruses. And I do want to be clear about this, that chickenpox is a type of herpes virus. Okay, it's related to herpes. So this will resolve within 3 weeks on its own, typically in healthy individuals. There can be some underlying complications that pop up afterwards. We can have things like immune dysfunction, which if you have any immune dysfunction before you're getting this, the chickenpox is what I'm trying to say. Or if you're taking any steroid therapy, maybe you're doing that to treat this infection as well. Anyways, that can be 20% fatality if you do have immune dysfunction associated with that. Your body can't fight off the virus as well, and you'd be more likely to die. So that's why it increases to 20% fatality. Steroid therapy, such as asthma treatments, and developing asthma as well, due to your body reacting more from the inside. Some people just present the infection a little bit differently due from all that. And steroids lower your immune system response. I do want to make sure you guys are aware of that as well. So you have to weigh your pros and cons there, and of course talk to your doctor. We can have pneumonia crop up as a result of this, as if it spreads into your respiratory system, which is uncommon. We have pregnant women who can have be contracting the disease, pass it on to their fetus. And if we have that happen within the first 28 weeks, we might see malformation of toes, fingers, brain, eye, and peripheral nerves. If we see it later on in the pregnancy, you can see the baby develop pneumonia as a result. Newborns themselves, you don't want to, I guess newborns, it just says not breastfed, but it just has to do with newborns who have not been breastfed are more susceptible to the disease than the ones who have, because the mother's antibodies will be conferred onto the newborn if they have had breast milk. Colostrum is how that's happening. But anyways, that's how that would work. That's kind of what it's talking about there. If you are newborn and not breastfed, you're more likely to have the disease and have complications from the disease. Encephalitis can also occur, is very, very rare. Encephalitis being inflammation, infection of the brain. These are statistics. In general, it's underreported because people, report friggin' chicken pox. You just get it and then you go, it's like a cold, right? So that's why we don't have a whole lot of statistics available on it every day. A lot of these statistics slides that I am going to show to you guys, you are more than welcome to look through these and kind of get an idea of how deadly or how widespread or how horrible these diseases have become, or better diseases have become over years. Through these slides. I'm not necessarily going to be going through the details of these as we go through these chapters. I don't expect you. I will not ask you test questions about how many deaths per year there are on average for chickenpox. I'm not asking you stuff like that, okay? I want you to get the idea of the disease and how it works and how it affects people, not necessarily numbers that you have to memorize. So there is a there is a vaccine available for the chickenpox. It is a live attenuated vaccine, meaning that the virus is actually alive, but it has been altered in a way that it shouldn't be causing any disease symptoms. You get those shots. It can prevent reactivation if you've already had it previously, the chickenpox or the vaccine actually. But shingles is what develops if you get the chickenpox and, like I did, and I'm going out throughout my life as I get older and my immune system starts to fail me. And as I, start, not taking as well care of myself, I'm more likely to have that virus come back out from hiding and cause problems again. And that is what shingles is. It's previous chickenpox infection, okay, coming back out. We can also, so I don't know, there's vaccines available for that to prevent that from happening. Okay, that's also usually included alongside of the MMR vaccines now, and they're including it as MMR-V, measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella zoster. So yeah, you'll get one dose at 12 to 15 months and the second dose at 4 to 6 years as a booster. Okay, so this is how it's going to crop up. We're going to have your initial infection, like you have in kids. You have this widespread rash all over. Your body fights it off. You're doing good. You don't think about it anymore, and you're healthy now because your virus has moved from your body out into the area of a spinal cord known as like dorsal root ganglion, for example, like nerve cells in your spinal cord. Essentially, it will hide out there and literally just stay there. Then later in your life, when your immune system starts failing you for whatever reason, or for whatever reason, you get in a car accident and your body is stressed out or whatever, shingles can pop up. So now we've got a recurrence of the same infection that you had before. It's the same exact virus. It's just popping back out now that it's not being contained by your immune response as it normally would. So that's why we see this sort of pattern that we do. It comes up typically in certain areas on the body, typically, because of how it comes out along the nerves. So shingles is reactivation of varicella zoster virus from a previous infection. It comes out usually along the dorsal root and cranial nerves. So that's why we have that rash along the side and the back, and the cranial, it'll come out in the face. It'll be due to psychological stress, x-ray treatments, immunosuppression, surgery, anything that can lower your body's ability to be a body, essentially, contain itself, do its job. Burning pain and tingling along the neuron is what most people will feel. It's actually considerably, from what I understand, I've never had it, but considerably more uncomfortable than the chickenpox initially was. You'll get a rash all along the neuron area on the back and the face. And then we'll see about 1 million cases per year of this. It's a 30% chance of recurrence if you've had the chickenpox previously of getting the shingles. It can be treated with acyclovir, just like the chickenpox could, just like other herpes viruses can. And there's a vaccine for this, specifically to prevent this, called Shigrix. It's just another depiction of movement along certain thoracic nerves causing shingles. Okay, moving on to smallpox. Smallpox is a naturally occurring, Naturally occurring smallpox has been completely eliminated from the planet. There's been no cases. Okay, it's still considered a bioterrorism threat because it is highly contagious and is very deadly. So a lot of our governments are still on the lookout for it. And if you are in the military, you're probably going to have gotten a vaccine for it. Nobody else is, just the military. Okay, that makes sense because people who are going out and fighting these wars in areas that they are concerned about, maybe potentially coming back out with smallpox as bioterrorism threats. They want your frontline men to be protected so that they can continue fighting for you. And, we would move on after that from whatever we would need to do to protect everybody else. That's the idea, in case anybody wants to wonder why that is. We have a rash that's involved, macular, papular, vesicular, and pustular progress as it gets worse. It'll leave very serious scar tissue after it has healed. It's pretty disfiguring. There's two forms, variola major and variola minor. The virus that causes smallpox is called variola. You definitely want to be aware of that. You will want to be aware of all of these diseases. If I talk about chickenpox, you better be able to tell me it's the varicella zoster. Okay. Smallpox, you better be able to tell me it's variola. If I ask you necrotizing fasciitis, you should be able to say that's probably most likely going to be Streptococcus pyogenes causing that. Okay, stuff like that. So you are going to need to know these things as you guys are studying. So every detail is not necessarily important, but try to stick to what we are talking about. Like, why am I telling about smallpox and what's important about it? Okay. Right. So variola major, the worst one, the most virulent, dead in 10 to 16 days. Variola minor, not as bad. Okay. Whoa. Okay. Variola major was eradicated worldwide. We quarantined the sick people and vaccinated all of their contacts. And so there was less spread. And so therefore it wasn't being spread. People would heal up, and that was that. And we got rid of it. It caused high fever, a blistering rash. It had a 50% mortality rate. We used the vaccinia virus. So this is an important one. So we know smallpox is caused by variola virus. Vaccinia virus. What does vaccinia sound like to you? Vaccine, right? So the vaccinia virus, in case you don't know, vaca means cow in like Latin. So this is a cowpox virus. Vaccinia virus is a cowpox virus that it was discovered by, I believe, Edward Jenner, that he looked at milkmaids, that they would sometimes get a little bit of an outbreak on their hands, but they had the nicest skin of everybody else. And why weren't they getting these horrible rashes, disfiguring rashes that everybody else was? Well, that's because they were getting exposed to vaccinia virus. They're getting exposed to cowpox, and that conferred protection from smallpox. So he used that information to inoculate his son, and his son, when he exposed his son to smallpox, was protected by having been inoculated with the vaccinia virus. And that was the first vaccine. I'm not talking about the ethics of it. I'm just letting you know what happened. So vaccines are called vaccines because vaccinia virus was used to vaccinate against smallpox, which is caused by variola virus, different virus. So we also can lump in monkeypox with this similar sorts of symptoms, not quite as terrible as smallpox, but it is still significant, right? So we've seen that even recently. This is just showing, essentially the presence of the rash on people's bodies, comparing smallpox versus chickenpox. They are different kinds of disease caused by different viruses, right? But they have similar sort of rashes, not as bad in chickenpox, obviously, and almost similar layout in the body where it breaks out. We get more breakout on the legs with smallpox, however, not really that important. But hand, foot, and mouth disease. This is common in babies and children under 5, fever, sore throat, and malaise. Malaise is whenever you just feel like crap, like it's just the yucky feeling whenever you're sick, like when you're just like, I am sick, like, that feeling of like being just kind of sore, run down all over, like, you feel sick. That's malaise, okay? In case you don't know. It can cause painful spots in the mouth. We get blisters and spots on the palms and hands, soles of the feet, genital area, buttocks, knees and elbows as well. It's caused by a virus in the group called enterovirus called Coxsackie. Coxsackie is the virus that causes hand, foot, and mouth disease. Be aware of the general symptoms of this disease, as well as what it's called, FYI. So it's called this, and it is caused by this virus. So what vaccine would offer the best protection against chickenpox and shingles? I'm not going to ask you questions like this on the test, FYI, but it would be Zostavax. Okay, moving on to the measles. At least 430 children die of measles every single day, which is kind of crazy to think about. Measles is also known as first disease back in the old ways of how they would name diseases. An effective vaccine is available. We know of this. And before it was introduced, it would kill about 6 million people per year. Roughly 85% of children around the world have received the vaccine as of 2010. This is showing outbreak occurrences and people, percentage of people that might have had, I guess not percentage, but numbers of people in population who have contracted measles before we introduced the vaccine compared to after we introduced the vaccine. There's a lot of these coming up, FYI, and other diseases. So sequelae, things that can be caused afterwards by having had the measles. We can have laryngitis, which is, your throat being inflamed and infected, bronchopneumonia, bacterial secondary infections associated with this. 6% of the time you'll get just typical pneumonia. Your body can have something called immune amnesia, to where it doesn't remember that it was ever exposed to having ever had the measles. Not everybody gets this, right? This is very uncommon, but you get the measles, you clear it, you're like, I had the measles, I'm protected from it. And then you can just go get it again because you were the one that had immune amnesia. Your body just don't remember having been exposed to it. It didn't produce a proper response, essentially. 1 in a million cases get subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, having to do with infection in the brain. Measles picture. Global measles numbers. Look at it if you want to. You can pause this video. Rubella is third disease. It's also known as German measles. It's not the same thing as the measles. It is rubella, okay? Minor rash, little complication. If you are a pregnant woman and you get infected with it while you are pregnant, it can cause serious damage to the fetus. So you should definitely, have been vaccinated before you get pregnant. Hopefully you live in somewhere like America where that is the case. Infection within the first trimester, if you are a woman that is pregnant with a child, during that first trimester, being pregnant with your little baby, you happen to get rubella and pass it on to your baby, that can induce miscarriage and cause multiple permanent defects in the newborn, as well as that. So even if you aren't miscarrying, you could have that issue. Congenital defects can also occur if you are able to carry your child to term, including deafness, cardiac abnormalities, ocular lesions in the eye, and then mental and physical debilitation. It's a pretty serious thing that you want to protect from. We have measles, mumps, rubella vaccine to protect from that. Fifth disease, it's typically called fifth disease. It's also known as erythema infectiosum, and it is caused by a human parvovirus B19. It's mild. It causes a slacked cheek appearance with a red just on the cheeks, low-grade fever, a bit of malaise. It's really not a very serious disease. It can persist and be reactivated under sunlight, which can cause stress to the cells on the surface of your skin. Yeah, it's more serious in the people who are immune compromised or pregnant. We know this for most diseases, that's the case. Roseola, also known as sixth disease. Roseola is common in babies, get exposed and typically show disease with roseola at around 6 months to 2 years. It's caused by human herpes virus 6 or human herpes virus 7. So these are herpes viruses. 70% of the cases will not have any visible symptoms at all, other than maybe a brief high fever. That high fever can lead to seizures. By the time the rash appears, the disease is almost over, and typically 100%, I say typically, 100% of the US population will be affected by adulthood, having had roseola, and you didn't even know your mom just thought you had a little bit of a fever for a couple days, and that was it. Scarlet fever, also known as second disease. Again, Streptococcus pyogenes, strep. If it has a bacteriophage for the gene for erythrogenic toxin, then scarlet fever can result. Okay, that is what we call transduction, which is a term that we have talked about way back in the beginning. I believe unit 1. Transduction is movement of a gene into a cell via phage or virus. We can have viruses do that to us as well. But in this case, we're talking about a phage, a bacteriophage, giving this toxin to the bacteria. So now the bacteria can produce this toxin because the phage transmitted that gene to it. Okay. We have sore throat, fever, strawberry tongue, and rash associated with scarlet fever. So that's how that scarlet fever would develop as a result of Streptococcus pyogenes, if it got that infection with that type of phage. Okay. Warts, moving on to warts. Warts are also known as papillomas. Almost every single person has had one in their lifetime. Very, very common. There's all different kinds of warts, and I'm not going to necessarily go through these, but here they are if you are interested. Warts. This is molluscum contagiosum. We have smooth waxy nodules on the face, trunk, and the limbs, sometimes indented in the middle. We have high incidence in the Pacific Islands of this. Children get them on the face, arms, legs, and trunk, whereas the adults get it in the genital area. But if you are immune compromised, you can get it all over the body and can be disfiguring, a lot like what you see with smallpox. For the large pustular skin lesions now, we talked about that was the rashes first, and now the second one for the skin, we're talking about large pustular skin lesions. Starting with leishmaniasis, this is a zoonosis transmitted by female sand flies. We saw this a lot in the Middle East with people going out there for the war. People who just live there get this as well. It is can be cutaneous or mucocutaneous. If it's cutaneous, we can find that typically in the Mediterranean areas, Africa and Indian regions as well. It's localized infection of the capillaries of the skin. And that's the skin. And mucocutaneous can affect the skin and mucous membranes as well. So that's going to be found in Central and South America. Cutaneous anthrax is exactly what it sounds like, skin anthrax, anthrax on the skin. We're going to be talking about anthrax in other areas of the body in later chapters. Anthrax is caused by Bacillus anthracis. So what does that mean? It's Bacillus makes endospores, right? Bacillus and Clostridium make endospores. Bacillus anthracis forms a black Escher. That's how I say that word. When endospores enter the skin and germinate there, that black, hard, kind of crusty area. Okay. 11 cases occurred following that bioterrorism attack in fall of 2001. That was kind of a bad deal. That was actually, I haven't heard about that. You should probably look it up. I'm not going to talk about it right here, but it was a pretty serious issue. Pretty serious, government, I don't want to say plot, but whatever. Bad time though, for sure. 20% mortality if you don't treat your anthrax. Okay, so if you get the anthrax, definitely at least treat it if you're exposed to it, please. Ringworm, going on to this. These are cutaneous mycoses. Myco, when you hear that word, mycoses are fungal infections. Always. Okay, so these are cutaneous, which are skin-based fungal infections. Ringworm is included within this, right? These are caused by dermatophytes, which are fungi or mycoses. So these are caused by dermatophytes, which are fungi that colonize skin. Okay, mycoses that are strictly confined to the non-living epidermal tissues and their derivatives are what we call ringworm. Okay, tinea is a word that tinea just means worm. Okay, if you ever see it, it means worm. But we know now that ringworm, which looked worm-like, is caused by fungi, dermatophytes, mycoses. So we know they're not caused by worms. They thought it was, they were wrong. They named it Tinea whatevers, and they were wrong about it. So now they're called Tinea blah, 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 and they're caused by fungus. So don't let that confuse you. Don't let it confuse you. So they are actual fungi, okay? So we have a lot of different kinds that can do this. This is the table that's kind of going over that a little bit. Tinea capitis causes it in the scalp, as well as eyelashes and stuff. Tinea barbae is the form that you get from in the beard, if you get ringworm in the beard. So if dermatophytes that happen to cause these infections infect you in the beard area, that thing that's happening to you in your beard ringworm situation is officially scientifically called Tinea barbae. That's ringworm of the beard. Okay, the thing that causes it, the organisms that are causing it are not called Tinea something. So just the diseases. We'll clarify that. Anyways, you can go through these if you're interested. Superficial mycoses are mycoses that are just kind of on the surface and not seriously affecting the patient. Outer epidermal surface, okay, they're innocuous, they're cosmetic typically. They don't have as much inflammatory effect. They could have some, but they don't have like serious like itching or something like that. Tinea versicolor is a disease that is an example of that. Tinea versicolor means anything that was caused by those mycoses. So this is a mycosis, caused by these dermatophytes that are the fungal causes of this disease, right? So Tinea versicolor, we get changes in skin color. Essentially, we will have a chronic scaling of melanocytes. So that's cells that produce the darker pigments, leading to patches of light and dark pigments. That can be treated, and but it can leave lingering effects for some people. Just depends on, you know, the person and the treatment and the age and everything like that, right? So other superficial mycoses include folliculitis. I'm sure you've heard about psoriasis and seborrheic dermatitis, a pretty common one. So what location is affected by ringworm in the disease that we would refer to scientifically as Tinea barbae? The ringworm would be located in the beard. That's one that we actually brought up. You will be welcome to go back to the table if you needed to. Now I'm going to talk about the eye stuff. Eye obviously is exposed to the environment. So we have a thin membrane of tissue called the conjunctiva to protect everything and the inside of the eyelids and all of that. That's all of this is the conjunctiva. We also have secretion of oil and mucus containing fluids to lubricate and protect the surface of the eye. The tears really help to flush things out as well. So those are the defenses of the eye normally. The cornea is also exposed to the environment. That's the dome-shaped central portion of the eye over the iris. It's 5 to 6 layers of epithelial cells. They can regenerate quickly and be shed quickly. So, you know, if it's damaged, we're usually shedding it pretty quickly so that there's not a whole lot of infection that can take hold in that situation. We also talk about this as being the windshield of the eye because it's that front exposure of, you know, what we see out of. Tears are the best defense of the eye. They are aqueous fluid, water-based. They also have oil in them, and they also can have mucus associated with them. They are formed in lacrimal gland at the upper corner of each eye and drain into the lacrimal duct at the inner corner. And, you know, obviously, if you have collection of tears in excess, then you'll have them dropping down your face. Immune privilege of the eye. The eye has something called immune privilege to help it protect vision. It doesn't want your whole body coming in and attacking with that same hardcore, you know, let's cause pain and inflammation situation in a delicate area where you need to see in order to survive, especially when we were talking about things, you know, evolutionarily, whatever organism that has an eye might not want to lose that vision when it's out in the wild running away from predators, right? Or hunting. How can you hunt? You know, stuff like that. A lot more difficult without your eyes. And if you lost them, you could lose them permanently. So we have immune privilege to protect our eye from our immune response against an infection. They have their own B and T cell response associated with the eye. The anterior chamber is largely cut off from blood supply, so you can't have things infiltrating from there to cause inflammation. And the lymphocytes like B's and T cells that gain access to the eye are less active than they would be elsewhere in the body. So they're controlled to keep them regulated a little bit more. 20% of people tested have no recoverable bacteria in their eye at all. It seems to be sterile. 20% of people. Other than that, seems to resemble the skin. If I ask you guys what the biome of the eye looks like, you can just say the skin looks like the skin. A lot of different kinds of bacteria, right? Conjunctivitis. We know what this is. It's pink eye. So we have an infection of the conjunctiva. We can have bacterial versions resulting in milky discharge, viral versions where we'll have a clear discharge. Allergic responses will have a lot of clear fluid. Redness and eyelid swelling are common in association with conjunctivitis. And you can also develop photophobia, literally just being sensitive to the light. These are pictures that are showing that conjunctivitis. Trachoma. This is caused by Chlamydia trachomatis. Chlamydia trachomatis is the bacterium, okay? It's bacterium that will cause infection to the eye and lead to blindness. It is the leading cause of blindness worldwide. And it causes, the infection will have inflammation associated with it, permanent scarring. The scarring within the inside of your eyelids abrades your cornea. That itself is what can lead to the blindness. Antibiotics are effective for treating this. So if you can treat this before you get the permanent blindness, that would be great. So that's the idea there. I already said that antibiotics are effective, and it's typically transmitted by like flies and stuff like this. You have this poor child that is having bacteria transmitted from one person, one place to the next, and whatever, because there's not effective control in those areas of the world. So keratitis is another thing that is more serious infection, typically, than conjunctivitis would be. Keratitis can lead to complete corneal destruction altogether. It can be caused by any microorganism after trauma to the eye. A very, very common one to cause this would be HSV1, herpes. Herpes can cause this. Misdirected activation of oral herpes and spread into the eye can cause keratitis and corneal destruction. We also can have acanthamoeba. Acanthamoeba is an amoeba, which is a protozoan found in tap water, freshwater lakes, and it can cause keratitis and lead eventually to complete corneal destruction. It's often found in contact lens wearers, people who are not changing their contact fluid often enough, or treating their contacts adequately. You're rinsing it under your sink water and not putting it into your sterilizing solutions. Maybe consider that. This is acanthamoeba keratitis, found in tap water and freshwater lakes, frequent to contact wearers. It doesn't always lead to that horrible of an effect, but it can. So river blindness. River blindness is the last disease that we're going to be getting into for the eye. It's caused by a chronic parasitic infection caused by helminths, which are worms, eukaryotes, large eukaryotes. Not large eukaryotes, I'm a large eukaryote, but you get the idea. On the microbe scale of things, these are the large guys. So this is worms in your eye. Okay, that's river blindness. It's endemic, found regularly in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. It is caused by something called Wolbachia. Okay, so Onchocerca volvulus. So, okay, hold on really quick. I need to bring this other thing up for you. Why I can't click. Okay, I was trying to find a good picture of the life cycle of this, but just forget it. So you don't need to know that much about it. Okay, this is caused by the helminth, the worm, Onchocerca volvulus. It's also called onchocerciasis, in case you guys are looking this up and are interested in any of these diseases, or if you choose this for your project, okay, for your presentations. So it is a nematode, the Onchocerca helminth is, and it carries this bacteria within it called Wolbachia. And apparently, this is relatively recently discovered that this Wolbachia bacterium is what actually enables Onchocerca volvulus to be, this pathogen that it is to these people. So anyways, I wanted to kind of show you guys about that, but there's not good pictures about it that actually are not super complicated. So forget it. Anyways, the worms migrate, they get bit, the person gets bit by the black fly, okay, gets into the skin that worms do. Fly bites you, worms from the fly get into your skin. That's what I'm trying to say. And then they migrate into the eye because gross. Worms are gross like that. It causes a lot of inflammation in the eye, of course, because your body's trying to fight it off. And it can cause permanent damage to the retina and the optic nerve as a result of infection with these worms. We would treat this with ivermectin and doxycycline as well, just to be sure that we're killing off that worm and its parasites. So yeah, ivermectin, pretty common treatment for worms. So that's the end of this chapter. In summary, we talked about skin. It's a great barrier to infection. It has to be completely broken, essentially into by either an organism or a cut or a scrape or a surgery or something like that in order to get things into you. Things typically can't just get in from normal, healthy skin. So it works pretty well, actually. So that's the physical barrier aspect. We have the chemical defenses, the salts, the pH, and everything like that. And then we have just the normal microbiota of the skin. And remember, the eye microbiota resembles that of the skin. So that is it for chapter 18. And then chapter 19, because I can never remember the order of these off at the top of my head. Chapter 19 is going to be the nervous system stuff, which it's exciting for me. There's going to be stuff about rabies, and you guys know how I feel about that probably by now. And I will see you there.